Liebe Studierende der Virtuellen Akademie Nachhaltigkeit in der Vorlesung Transition Management, in dieser Lehrveranstaltung wird es darum gehen, Städte und Nachhaltigkeit zu betrachten, Ihnen eine Einführung zu geben in die Transformation von Städten als Grundlage dann für Vertiefungen sehr unterschiedlicher Stadtsituationen. Denn letztlich geht es im Transition Management, das haben wir in den ersten Veranstaltungen diskutiert, ja um Übergänge, um Transformationen zur Nachhaltigkeit. Und deswegen soll in dieser Lehrveranstaltung genau dieser Zusammenhang im Mittelpunkt stehen und Ihnen einige plastische Eindrücke über die Nachhaltigkeitsherausforderungen in Städten gegeben werden und aufgezeigt werden, wo Ansatzpunkte sind, genau mit dieser Herausforderung umzugehen. Sie sehen hier oben die Gliederung der Veranstaltung. Ich werde gleich nach der Erläuterung des Aufbaus auf die Lernziele der Veranstaltung eingehen. Und dann werden wir beginnen mit einer Einführung, eine kleine filmische Impression in das, was wir derzeit weltweit, insbesondere in den entstehenden Megacities erleben. Und das die Frage aufwirft, können Städte überhaupt nachhaltig sein und wo sind mögliche Ansatzpunkte, nachhaltige Entwicklungspfade zu gestalten. Das leitet dann über zu einer vertiefteren Betrachtung der Infrastrukturbereiche, die näher analysiert werden müssen, um Ansatzpunkte für eine nachhaltige Entwicklung zu identifizieren, von der Energieversorgung, den Müll- und Abwasserversorgungsstrukturen bis hin zu den Verkehrsinfrastrukturen. Sie werden sehen, gerade die Gestaltung von Infrastrukturbereichen ist ein ganz zentraler Hebel, um nachhaltige Stadtentwicklungen möglich zu machen. Und das leitet dann weiter zu den Hebeln, die jenseits dieser technologischen Infrastrukturmaßnahmen notwendig sind, um über nachhaltige Städte nachzudenken, weil klar wird, dass es genauso wichtig wird, über Lebensstile, Mobilitätsmuster und viele kulturelle und sozial geprägte Fragen nachzudenken, wenn wir nachhaltige Städte erreichen wollen. Schließlich möchten wir einen Sprung machen auf die Frage der politischen und gesellschaftlichen Steuerung. Denn neben der Umsetzung von nachhaltigen Städten durch Politik, sozusagen von oben, top-down, spielt zunehmend die Bewegung von unten. Engagierte Bürgerinnen und Bürger, die Elemente nachhaltiger Stadtentwicklung in die Hand nehmen, eine ganz wichtige Rolle in den Transformationsprozessen. Und hier möchten wir Ihnen einen kleinen Einblick in die Transition Town-Bewegung geben, die eines der prominentesten Beispiele für diese Form von nachhaltiger Stadtsteuerung darstellt. In der letzten Episode machen wir dann wieder den Sprung auf den Bereich der Forschung. Wie begleitet und durchaus mit initiiert man aus der Perspektive der Forschung solche Transformationsprozesse? Was heißt das für den Modus der Forschung, den wir in einer der ersten Vorlesungen kennengelernt haben? Und es wird deutlich werden, dass Stadtforschung in dem hier skizzierten Sinne transdisziplinäre Forschung in ihrer bestverstandenen Form ist. Und wir werden das illustrieren in einem Interview, das ich führe mit dem Programmleiter der stadtbezogenen Forschung am Wuppertal Institut, Dr. Ralf Schüle, der dann die zuvor gemachten konzeptionellen Aussagen nochmal plastisch werden lässt an einem Forschungsinstitut wie dem Wuppertal Institut. Und die Vorlesung wird mit einem Fazit und einem Ausblick auf die Aufgaben zum Selbststudium und der Literatur enden. Ein kurzer Blick auf die Lernziele der Veranstaltung. 5 Aspekte sind bei dieser Lehrveranstaltung wichtig. Einmal sollen Sie die besondere Bedeutung von Städten und Entwicklung in Städten für eine nachhaltige Entwicklung kennen und auch erläutern können. Denn das ist die Grundlage für die daran dann anschließenden Transition-Prozesse. Sie sollen daraus abgeleitet die Relevanz von Transformation gerade in Megacities verstehen. Verstehen, warum Megacities und ihre Veränderung und ihre nachhaltige Gestaltung und die Initiierung von Transformationsprozessen in diesen Städten eine Schlüsselbedeutung für die künftige nachhaltige Entwicklung auf diesem Planeten haben. Drittes Lernziel bezieht sich auf die Infrastrukturbereiche. Sie sollen die unterschiedlichen Infrastrukturbereiche kennen, die relevant dafür sind, die nachhaltige Entwicklung von Städten zu gestalten und sollen diese auch an konkreten und plastischen Stadtbeispielen beschreiben können. Sie sollen schließlich als viertes etwas sagen können zu Steuerungsansätzen für eine nachhaltige Stadtentwicklung und dabei das besondere Zusammenspiel von Top-Down- und Bottom-up-Steuerung kennen, die Transition-Bewegung einordnen können in andere Ansätze der nachhaltigen Gestaltungsprozesse für Städte. Und schließlich geht es darum, dass Sie am Beispiel der Stadtforschung illustrieren können, inwiefern hier Formen transdisziplinärer Forschung notwendig sind und was diese transdisziplinäre Forschung konkret bedeutet am Beispiel der Untersuchung von städtischen Transformationen. Starten möchten wir in diese Episode mit einem möglichst plastischen Eindruck. Sie werden jetzt einen Film sehen können, der Ihnen Impressionen davon vermittelt, welche Nachhaltigkeitsherausforderungen mit der Entwicklung von Megacities auf diesem Globus verbunden sind. Und ich glaube, dieser filmische Eindruck wird eine sehr schöne Grundlage bieten, um sich dann genauer anzuschauen, wo die Hebel für die Gestaltung von nachhaltigen Städten sind. Ich wünsche Ihnen viel Vergnügen beim Schauen der gerade angekündigten filmischen Eindrücke.
This year, for the first time in history, more than half the world's population will be living in an urban environment. 3.3 billion people in cities and towns. And it won't stop there. Dhaka, Mumbai, Shanghai, Manila and many more Asian cities will join Tokyo in the ranks of the world's megacities within the next 20 years, when Asia's urban population will rise by another 1.1 billion. I'm Taimur Nabili, and on this edition of 101 East, we ask, will the new urban arrivals necessarily find a better life amid the bright lights? Indonesia's capital, Jakarta, is a megacity gone wrong. It's already considered to be the world's third most polluted city after Bangkok and Mexico City, and it's still growing rapidly. By 2015, it's projected to be the world's 8th largest city. Ginny Stein reports.
This is peak hour in Jakarta. Few are getting anywhere fast. 9 million people live in the Indonesian capital, but an extra 2 million commute in each day for work.
Hundreds of new cars are bought by people every day, and about 1,035 motorbikes as well.
In just the last 30 years, the city has seen a tenfold increase in population. It's caused massive overcrowding. People grab any spare land, like the edges of this railway line.
Jakarta is a very tough place to live. We work very hard and it is tough to live here.
Haryanto came to Jakarta 4 years ago, hoping to escape rural poverty. He used to think this would be his temporary home. The authorities regularly try to evict him, but he's got nowhere to go.
We also pay our neighborhood contribution when we are asked, but we are still being evicted.
Sudiyoso, the former governor of this chaotic city, set up Jakarta's version of a mass transport system, the busway. Key arterial routes have lost a lane in either direction for designated bus lanes.
When it's finished, we won't have to use private cars anymore. We will be able to go everywhere by public transport. But it takes time, because we do everything on our own. The central government hasn't helped at all.
But this grand design has struck teething problems. Only a small proportion of the promised buses have been delivered.
The good thing is it's fast, but what's bad is that there aren't enough buses, so it's crowded inside and people push each other.
Tia Kasuma is a traffic planning specialist. She says while the busway is far from ideal, it's the best solution for now.
This is the affordable solution, I think, for the government.
She says traffic has become so bad in Jakarta that the cost to business each year is now enormous.
It's around 470 million US dollars.
It's only 40 kilometres, but the main distribution route from the port to the city centre is a case in point. Traffic now moves so slowly that the number of trips each truck can make in a day has been cut dramatically.
4 times a day and now down to 1 or 2. 2 is quite a good number, actually.
The rapid population growth has outstripped the government's ability to provide basic services. Even getting rid of rubbish is a problem.
You have to lock your garbage.
Yes, we have to in this area anyway, because people are going to my rubbish and then make a mess on it.
From here to here, 6,000 tonnes of Jakarta's waste is trucked out each day to an open-fill dump site.
Dan itu dilakukan di seluruh Indonesia.
What we do at the moment is called open dumping, and it's done all over Indonesia. Open dumping is just putting all the garbage on a big open site. But you can see that it contaminates the earth, and it's our children and grandchildren who will suffer. They will not be able to get clean water anymore.
With so much waste and so little space, and fears for the army of scavengers who work here, authorities last year moved to restrict the height of these rubbish mountains. A 12-metre limit has been set. That's the height of a 3-storey building.
But that height restriction is a rule routinely broken at this 24-hour operation, leaving scavengers at risk of being buried alive in rubbish. Fixing waste management, traffic gridlock and finding homes for the burgeoning population are all huge tasks. Former Governor Sutioso says there is no alternative to his plan.
This is a huge development plan to be able to tackle this problem. In order to do that, we need time, a lot of money, and we need the patience from the people. And we hope that people are willing to make sacrifices.
The price of failure is just too serious to contemplate.
Jakarta will go broke. I think it's not viable anymore.
Across Asia, Jakarta's problems are mirrored in many of its huge megacities. Not only is the economic lifeblood threatened by traffic and waste, but the inhabitants themselves are already starting to fall prey to the appalling pollution they create.
My guests on the programme today are, in Bangkok, Nandita Mongia, the Asia-Pacific Advisor on Energy and the Environment for the United Nations Development Programme. In London, urban planning expert Professor Ricky Burdett is with the London School of Economics, and architect Alejandro Gutierrez works for Arup, a company that's creating a purpose-built eco-city in China. Thank you all very much indeed for being with us today. Nandita, let me begin with you, if I might. The problems that we saw there in Jakarta are pretty common to a number of the large Asian cities and the growing Asian cities. Is there any chance that Jakarta and the other growing cities are going to be able to get any better and solve the problems that we saw in that report?
I think it's possible with a little bit more of coordinated planning that one can address the issues in a short, medium and long-term framework. I know, for instance, in Japan, there's this whole city of Kitakyushu, which was absolutely miserable in terms of its environmental and energy-related waste and degradation, and it pulled itself out of it. And there are other cities that have joined Kitakyushu in the sister city plan, and they're moving in the same direction.
Right.
So I wouldn't be able to say every single city is moving in the same this direction of chaos. No.
Well, let's come to Ricky Burdett at the London School of Economics. Ricky, you're an urban planner. The idea that historical development is an issue in all this is an interesting one. But let me ask you first: is there necessarily a contradiction in terms between the size of a city and its livability?
No, not at all. I'm a great believer and very passionate about cities, simply because cities are here to stay. They've been there for thousands of years, and more people are going to be living there. That's a fact, which we can go into more in a moment. And actually, large cities don't necessarily mean negative conditions. I mean, think New York City, think London. These are cities which 100 years ago were the first megalopolises of the world. They were cities which grew from 1 million to 10 million in the space of maybe 80 or 90 years. And they had to get over the problems that Jakarta and others are facing today. Now, the example that I would quote, in fact, is from Asia, of one of the largest, in fact, the largest city in the world today, if you take the largest metropolitan region, which is Tokyo, which all in all, if you take a series of parameters in terms of livability, in terms of income, in terms of sustainability, the number of people who take public transport in Tokyo to get to work is 80%, 78% if I'm correct according to latest statistics. In Los Angeles it's exactly the other way around, 80% take cars. So I think cities, if well managed, and this is the key issue, can actually sustain human life in very positive ways.
Let's come to Alejandro Gutierrez. You're building a city in China with the specific aim of maybe overcoming some of these problems before they even get started. Tell us what your thoughts are on the development of cities and the ability of people to live in close communities like that.
Well, one of the big challenges in this case is to future-proof cities when you're starting from today, and to build something that will last for 40 or 50 or 100 years in terms of its construction period. And in order to foresee how that will be and how you can future-proof them, you need to look at basically, I think, two main elements: resource efficiency and how cycles of water and cycles of waste streams are dealt with in a completely different manner, so that you can actually use the waste output of water, for example, as energy, and use the waste output of municipal solid waste as energy to reduce the impact on the environment, to create better quality of life, and to produce value for that community. Well, I think that's one element, resource efficiency. The other big element, I think, is quality of life. And I think environmental impact, resource efficiency, and quality of life are the key drivers of the future of cities.
Ricky, I mean, you mentioned Tokyo earlier on. How has Tokyo managed to get it right?
I think the key issue underlining all these important discussions about infrastructure, waste and everything else is one thing, is how compact and how dense a city actually is. Tokyo got around this issue of transport because even though it happens to have 35 million people, it has them in a relatively contained, and I mean that it's a relative term, area. It's not like, say, Mexico City or some of the other ever-expanding cities that you can't ever see the edge on. And now, if a city continues to expand forever, the amount of investment you need to make in transport infrastructure, waste, electricity, and everything else is enormous. If you bring people more together and you manage that well, and that's where I would use even Shanghai as a positive model. We'll come back to that with Alejandro in a moment, I'm sure. But New York and others, if you actually have a transport system which has people relatively closer together so that the commuting journeys from where you live to where you work are actually reduced, you get a much more efficient city. Let's remember that the big cities of the world consume 75% of world energy and contribute 75% to CO2 emissions. So a small impact, a small change in all of these cities on their energy footprint actually has a massive impact on the planet. But that is, as Nandita has already said, to do with design. But you can't, I think, retrofit a city a vast sprawling city like Los Angeles or one like Mexico City or some of the equivalent scenarios in urban Asia. I think you have to work on the notion that you have compact and well-connected development, which of course has enormous value in terms of Alejandro's point of quality of life. People need to meet on the street and talk. They go to universities together and all that.
But is planning from Alejandro, is planning from scratch the answer to mega cities? I mean, do you think that Dongtan is going to become a mega city and avoid all of the problems that we have seen in Jakarta and all the problems we know about in all the other cities?
I think the opportunity is here very, very powerful. You have China in the next 20 years needs to build the equivalent to 50 Shanghais, and that is people migrating from countryside to cities. So Dongtan is one of those, let's say, cities, and what we are basically challenged here is to produce those 50 cities in a form and with a planning integration and with an understanding of competitive advantages for cities compared to other cities in the world that actually can help that city and that region to grow healthy, to have a possible life for people and to have an enjoyable life for people.
Okay, we will take a short break there and we'll return in just a couple of minutes with more 101 East. Well, on the programme today we have Nandita Mongia of the UN Development Programme. In London, urban planner Professor Ricky Burdett at the London School of Economics and architect Alejandro Gutierrez, who's with Arup. Thank you for staying with us on the programme. Ricky, let me come to you and talk a little bit about the Dongtan situation, if you would. How does building a city from the ground up make a difference? And does deciding where you put the city in the first place play into the whole scheme of things?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, you have to consider very carefully where you need a new city. And I'm sure that Dongtan is a very well designed concept, but I think in terms of our responsibility for the planet, we have to first use our cities as well as possible. Let me just take you back, for example, where we are here in London. We have an enormous amount of redundant industrial land, which instead of building new towns all over the place, we should use first, and that's public policy at the moment. I think Asian cities like Shanghai need to take a really hard look to see whether they're using all the redundant land along the riverfront, all those factories that maybe in 5 or 10 years are not going to be there. I think Dongtan may work very well, but let's not forget, and I think Alejandro will agree with this, you still have to get there, you still have to drive there. We tried this experiment in the UK in the 1950s with the new towns, and I have to say 50 years on the results are not great. How many people want to live in a new town when it's remote from business activity and everything else?
So let me
have to be
ask
careful not
Alejandro
to create a
answer
generation
that.
of suburbs rather than cities.
Alejandro, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the context in Europe is quite different, and I agree with Ricky in principle that in Europe and in general you should try to regenerate and intensify cities that within their own boundaries. But in the case of China, as I was saying before, the growth, the demographic shift and the economic growth generate the need for 50 Shanghais for the whole eastern border of China, which means that you cannot only think about regeneration of brownfield sites, and you have to think of development of new areas. In that context, Dongtan is a node within an urban region which is the Yangtze Delta River. And what Dongtan is doing is creating the first node of zero impact, meaning zero carbon emissions for the whole city, and zero tailpipe emissions, and fully powered by renewables in that region where Chongming Island is the poorest let's say, district of the region, and generating opportunities for people that live there to have better employment, better quality of life, and a better future, basically.
Let me ask Nandita, I mean, from the UN perspective and the whole long-term development angle, how do you see this?
I think as far as Dongtan is concerned, if it's located where it's located, chances of this going wrong are minimal.
Ricky, I saw you raise an eyebrow at the suggestion that there are not too many problems.
I just wanted to raise an issue that I don't think we can talk blandly about concepts of cities. Cities are not just places where people live It's also places where people go to do business, where they go to be educated, where they have to have hospitals. So the key thing in talking about any of these new urban developments, is to think about all the institutions that make life exciting and generate income and everything else.
All right.
And I think Alejandro is right to think of Dongtang as part of a big metropolitan region. But one cannot be naive about who's going to pay for the hospitals and the institutions that need to actually sustain life.
Okay, we're getting to the end of the show, so let me finish it off by asking all three of you whether the existing cities that we've got, as we know they're becoming larger, ever larger, and some of them will become mega cities, whether they will be able to cope with the weight of population that's coming into them. Nandita, let me put that to you first. Do you think somewhere like Jakarta will be able to solve the problems it has and grow even larger without becoming worse?
I think in Jakarta there are many areas where things can be improved without too much of expenses, but just a bit of political will, partnership, bringing in the private sector. I've personally tried to initiate landfill waste management in Jakarta, and it has taken a long time and much longer than it has taken in several other countries. So it's not that it cannot be done or it cannot be minimized. It requires a regulatory environment, a policy setup, a partnership, and initiatives which are down, community-based as well as led by the private sector and the government. It's not something that anybody is suffering on his or her own volition. It's a community thing, and it's better organized and addressed at a comprehensive level. But Jakarta doesn't have to suffer every bit of it, what it's suffering.
Alejandro, you're building a city from scratch, but obviously most of the people are living in cities that have a long history. What is the future as far as urbanization is concerned from your perspective?
I think existing cities have the opportunity and must change to reflect, for example, the competitiveness of the global economy. If Jakarta is going, for example, if Jakarta is going to compete in the global economy as they have been for the last 20 years, they need to dramatically change their patterns of traffic and their management of the city. And I think integrated planning, where you plan about land uses and transport and resource management, is a very fundamental element of the whole equation. And then political will and governance, I think, are key elements to make cities work better in the future. Okay, and Ricky, a final word with you. You mentioned Tokyo earlier on, and that's a great example of a mega city that's got it right. But do you think that is a benchmark, a pattern for the future? Do you think every city will be able to achieve that?
I think it's absolutely possible. I think that big is not necessarily bad in terms of cities. I think the biggest challenge is, let's remember that 1 out of 3 inhabitants of cities in the next 20, 30 years will be living in slums. Therefore, we risk having concentrations of urban poverty rather than rural poverty. And I think what cities need to do is to accept people from different backgrounds and make sure that they don't get stuck in neighborhoods which are ghettos or slums of that sort. That requires, as Alejandro said, good planning, a sense of vision, and designing the shape of the future city in a way that it can, like Tokyo, be well connected and well supported. There are plenty of examples of big cities which are very, very livable.
And that is where we'll have to leave it. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us today. And that's all we've got time for. From me and everyone else here at 101 East, goodbye.
Ja, liebe Studierende, ich glaube, diese filmischen Eindrücke haben sehr deutlich gemacht, welche Herausforderungen in Städten im Hinblick auf eine nachhaltige Entwicklung liegen. Und diese Beispiele werden uns in der kommenden Episode dazu dienen, etwas systematischer aufzuarbeiten, wo die konkreten Ansatzpunkte sind, um nachhaltige Transformationen in Städten zu gestalten. Darauf freue ich mich mit Ihnen in der nächsten Episode.